this piece. CT, nuclear medicine, interventional. That is the lion's share of medical exposure. CT, 24% of, this is just normal, what we call, you don't do, what you get in your lifetime. If you look at an entire population, 24% of what they get is CT. Nuclear medicine is mostly due to heart, studies of the heart. And I think that will probably drop. Say this tends to be, 2006, they were using a lot of thallium-201, and that has a pretty hefty dose. Thallium has basically fallen out of use, number one, because of the dose, and number two, because it's more expensive than a technetium compound. Interventional, 7% in 2006. This one, I'll bet you when the next one of these reports comes out, this is going to be a much bigger piece of the pie. Interventional is growing by hundreds of thousands of exams a year. And this basically is due to the fact hospital stays are getting shorter. Anything that you can do in the hospital and send the patient right home and not have them stay overnight is considered a successful treatment. One of the issues is, the rule of thumb is, if you're spending more than 3 days in the hospital, your likelihood of picking up a hospital infection goes way up. So that's why there's a big push for hospitals to get you out of there in 3 days or less. And they really make a big push for that. Some of those hospital-based infections can be life-threatening, try as they might, through the epidemiologic programs they have in hospitals to keep infection rates down, find them as soon as they can and treat them. There is growing issues with bacterial infections that just don't respond well to therapy. But interventional things that, 10 years ago, you couldn't do. My brother had a heart valve replaced. In probably 10 years ago or so, they'd crack the sternum, open up, and go in invasively and do it. His valve was replaced during an interventional radiology procedure. He spent one night, went home, and went back to normal activity. So they can do an amazing number of things interventionally. That's why I think interventional IR is going to be a big growth area. CT, I don't think so much, because a lot of what that we were doing in CT is being converted to what? MR. Ultrasound is taking a bigger load. So anytime you can take something from an ionizing radiation procedure to something that is non-radiation, it's a big plus. U.S. average annual background, radon is about 200 millirem a year. This is though to the bronchial epithelium, so that's why radon is a gas. So that's why if you have a high enough radon level in your basement, it has to be taken care of. Usually that's with vents and fans. Other natural consumer products, yes, there is radioactive material. Basically, most of your smoke detectors have a very small amount of americium, I believe, is what they typically use. Because what happens, you've got a small amount of radioactive material, smoke comes in, and it's ionized, and that ionization charge is picked up, and the alarm goes off. But that's still not much. Medical diagnostic X-ray is about 39 millirem a year, nuclear medicine about 14. So in Southern California, what we use as kind of a thumbnail sketch is you're getting about 300 millirem or 0.3 Sievert. Got to do the math. Sorry, I don't sleep much. The puppy's just keeping me awake. 300. Yeah, so it'd be 3 millisieverts a year. So that's regardless. Sitting here in this building, you're probably getting a little more than that. There's a lot of concrete, and if you look at what's in the concrete, a lot of that stone and rock in the concrete itself, concrete has a fair amount of radioactive material in it. Terrestrial, we talked about that, the higher you are, or the geologic materials that you live in have a large amount of background. Kerala has been, if you Google Kerala, you'll see all sorts of studies they've done looking at the Kerala area of India with a significantly higher external dose rate from background compared to surrounding communities. Those populations have been matched for age, health, everything else, and the people in Kerala are healthier, they live longer, and they have a reduced rate of cancer. So you can take that for what it's worth. I think that's a good indicator that low-level radiation might have a benefit. Other sources of exposure: air travel, sleeping with another person, smoking. Now, what? Oh, sleeping with another person?
No, we're safe. We don't do that.
What's the scientific reason behind that?
That's a water break.
Okay.
All right, now, you look at it, a lot of folks question this, say, what are you talking about the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for? That talks about radioactive material. Yeah, it's true. However, what happened in California and many other states is they've taken that and said, you know, that's great for radioactive materials, but we're going to apply it to any source of radiation. California did that probably about 15 years ago. So where you see NRC and it talks about nuclear materials, you in your mind has to read that as any source of radiation. So 15 years ago, all of a sudden X-ray tubes and X radiation and the scanners you go through at the airport, all of that got folded into this. So basically the idea of NRC or any regulatory agency is to protect public health and safety. You've got a regulatory program in radiation safety that's promoted by various states or the NRC itself. And there's different organizations that participate in that. But it's all about the safe use of anything that emits or produces ionizing radiation. A lot of different regulatory stuff where it comes from. Federal, state, local, everybody can kind of do what they want. You have some sort of a governing body, they write a law. The law empowers a regulatory agency who writes a regulation to implement the law. And then you've got advisory organizations that have a way to put in their 2 cents. And then you actually have some agency that regulates and enforces that. If you read the laws, you get, this is interesting, you get one impression of what you're allowed to do and you're not allowed to do. If you read the regulation that gets written to support the law, oftentimes you get a very different idea. And since this is written by people, supposedly knowledgeable people, to implement this, there's a lot of subjective. So they write things and you read it and you'll interpret it one way, but the regulatory agency can walk in and say, no, we interpret it this way. And that's the ongoing battle that a lot of our hospitals and medical organizations have. This is the example. Congress writes the Energy Reorg Act of 1974, which tells the NRC, well, you need to make this work. They published 10 CFR Part 20, and there's a whole bunch of other CFRs. NCRP put contributed to that, Health Physics Society, American Medical Association, a whole bunch of folks. And then this comes down to not READ, radioactive material license user, but possessor of radiation producer. So that includes your X-ray. California, this is how California works. You will see these people coming through your facility. As a student, I would find someplace else to be when the inspectors are there. It's not necessarily a fun thing to watch, because they sometimes tend to, there are inspectors I know that will ask if any students are in the department, and they will find a student and ask them questions. Yeah, it's not a pleasant experience. California is also weird. You've got different groups. So you've got State of California out of Sacramento, and also an Orange County office that has the program that they run. You also have the County of San Diego that has their own program under contract with the State of California. And then you also have, what else did I have to play with? California and San Diego. There's one more in there someplace. Oh, how can I forget? LA County has a huge Department of Health Services that under contract to, with the state, do the enforcement. So one of the problems that causes is if you're working in different hospitals that are in different counties, you could be held to a different regulatory standard, because San Diego inspectors might interpret their program in such a way that you're non-compliant, whereas the state would look at what you're doing and say, oh yeah, no, fine, it's compliant. So there are slight differences. Related laws that cover all of this, these are the US ones. You got Title 21, all the different parts that deal with diagnostic X-ray systems and components, radiographic, fluoroscopic, and CT. This basically is mostly to let you know what the manufacturers are expected to do as far as what they provide, the safety types of things that they are supposed to provide. Then you've got Health and Safety Code. Title 17 is where all the radiation control regulations are for us, except for those parts that were incorporated into 10 CFR Part 20 when that incorporation occurred, so you have to know both of those. Title 22 is the regulations that deal with hospitals and how they're licensed and the types of patient protective things they have to have. And that goes into total minutia, how wide the halls have to be, openings for doors, access for handicap, all of that. Then Title 24 is the building code. So far, everything up here you can find online. California Building Code you cannot find online. It changes every year, and you have to pay money to get access. But that's where it talks about things like, one of the things that we always argued with is the openings in a fluoro room or an X-ray room had to be able to accommodate a disabled employee confined to a wheelchair. And the argument that was made is that it is extremely difficult for a wheelchair-bound technologist to perform radiologic technology. You can't manipulate your patient, you can make exposures, but it's a very difficult thing to do. However, building code says we don't care. This is what you're gonna do, this is how you access, specifies the glass, the room design, how many square feet, etc. Then you've got Title 10, Part 20, Title 21, Title 21, other things that deal with mammography and other things. The regulatory burden on radiology is significant. That handles not only technologists and staff and visitors, but patients as well. Regulatory agencies that are common that the hospitals you work with have to deal with, I certainly did. It's like having alphabet soup every day. The NRC, the FDA, the EPA, DOT, DHS, and the counties. What's complicating if you ever get into a position of being an administrator is you will find radiation-related regulations from EPA, FDA, NRC, DOT that are different slightly. So you have to find out which regulations are involved with a particular issue that you have, which is the most conservative, which means the most restrictive, and if you follow that, then you make everybody else happy. ACR, ACR sets standards for the radiology community through their accreditation program. So if you want to be known as an accredited interventional radiology department or an intervention or a CT service, things like that, you meet their standards, they come in and inspect, and they hand you a nice little certificate you put on the wall that says you are accredited by the American College of Radiology. Patients like things like that. Joint Commission sets standards for, evaluates, and accredits healthcare organizations. There's 2 others that were admitted into that by FDA. Joint Commission comes through, if you have a hospital that scores well, they come through every 4 years, and they look at everything. In radiology, I hate to call it a white glove test, but they will do glove tests looking at cleanliness. They will talk to housekeeping personnel in IR and ask them, how often do you clean this room? How often do you do what they call a terminal clean to basically kill any kind of infection they have in there? They will watch whether employees are washing their hands. You all know the hand washing rules, right?
Always.
When in patient care, when do you wash your hands? Oh, is that all?
And
Just
during,
before
and during.
After? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, it's, you have to wash your hands. You have to put gloves on. Okay? When you're finished touching the patient doing that with the gloves on, you basically, technically, have to wash your hands with the gloves on, take the gloves off, and then wash your hands. There are inspectors that will look for all of that.
What's the point of washing the gloves, though?
Don't ask me. That's an interpretation.
It's so crazy.
Technically, you can fight, hospitals fight that, but some inspect. The problem with the regulatory agencies. Yes.
What?
I don't know, I heard a laugh. Problem with regulatory agencies is they interpret things on their own. An inspector will come in and they will make an interpretation, and it's really hard to point out to them that they're wrong. So yeah, that just creates all sorts of issues. But yeah, if you're doing it right, for one patient in an IR procedure, nurses are washing their hands probably a half a dozen to a dozen times during one procedure. Because every time they do something different, it has to be washed. Some things you can get away with a solution that you just put on the wall and do that, but even some of those, if you watch people, you'll see a lot of misses, okay? And that's really something to protect patients, to keep that infection. Radiation, the radiation they get in their procedures are not gonna kill them, but some of those infections could, okay? NCRP, of course, promotes all sorts of standards. This is another report, limitation. This is how you limit exposure to ionizing radiation. These are, as a physical thing, I should have brought one. This is a small booklet with, I think it's probably 8-point type. So it's really small type, and usually at least 100 and something pages. The newer ones are much thicker. They're up to 300 and 400 pages. Each volume is anywhere from $150 to $400, $450 each. This is not something that students are ever going to buy. It's not anything that schools buy. But that's where, if you're going to fight a regulatory agency, that's where you go to say, excuse me, your interpretation doesn't meet community standard. Radiation units and quantities, you've got the old and the new. We are still seeing the old units in publications. Usually it's old with the new in parentheses, or they're new use with the old in parentheses. But you should all probably be at least familiar with those. Definitions, the only interesting thing is here is what they consider to be deep dose versus shallow dose. I don't have to restart anything. Thank you. They put some new security thing on these computers. This is absolutely idiotic. Okay, well, that's restarting. Let me pass these out. Might as well compliment what we can. All right, so this is the directed reading quiz. It's 25 questions. Open book, please, but work on your own so that you're able to answer these. You will find, since this comes from ASRT, I can bet you dollars to donut some of these questions or various types of like them are going to be on your licensing exam. So my only advice to these is read the question carefully. Yeah, ASRT has, they have a whole group of people to do these. You do need to put your name on these and hand them back, even though we will grade them in class. Yes, you get points.
Yay, thank you.
I know, I tried.